Look at her with that
Yes,
ancient
everything
book.
is on schedule.
Probably
Can you
never
believe
seen the
this?
inside of a
Absolutely
private jet before.
ridiculous!
Blake Morrison's voice
This is
cut through the
utterly
hushed elegance of the
ridiculous.
Van Nuys Airport private terminal like a sharp blade through silk. His words weren't whispered. They weren't subtle. They were delivered with the
You
casual
really think
cruelty
that
of
book
someone
is
who
more
had never
important
faced
than what
real
I'm saying?
consequences for his actions.
Question. We need to
The
expedite
exclusive
the merger.
lounge stretched
Time
before
is
him
of the
like a
essence.
monument to wealth and privilege. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across leather furniture that cost
Yes,
more than
everything
most
is on
people's
schedule.
cars.
Can you believe this?
The air itself
Absolutely
seemed filtered
ridiculous!
through money, carrying the scent of aged whiskey, and hand-rolled cigars from the smoking section mixed with the delicate aroma of $500 per pound Ethiopian coffee beans. Blake stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his designer Armani suit perfectly tailored to his lean frame. The Rolex Submariner on his wrist caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass, sending brief flashes of gold across the pristine white walls. His Hermes briefcase sat at his feet more prop than necessity, since Blake Morrison rarely did actual work. At 29, Blake had never known struggle. Born into the Morrison Industries shipping empire, he'd been handed everything from his first car to his current position as vice president of business development. His Harvard business degree hung on his office wall, a testament not to his intelligence, but to his family's donation history. The position came with a corner office, a 7-figure salary, and zero real responsibility. His girlfriend, Madison Torres, giggled beside him. At 27, she was a carefully crafted vision of social media perfection. Her Instagram account boasted 2.1 million followers who hung on her every perfectly curated post. Today, she wore a white Chanel blazer that matched her bleached teeth and highlighted her golden skin. Her phone was permanently attached to her manicured fingers, always ready to capture content for her audience. "Don't be so dramatic," Blake Madison said, her voice carrying the slight accent that her followers found exotic. "It's probably just a charter mix-up, some wannabe influencer thinking she's a big shot." Blake's gaze was fixed on a woman sitting alone by the massive windows that overlooked the private runway. She was completely absorbed in reading a thick dog-eared paperback, her expression one of calm concentration. Everything about her presence seemed to irritate Blake on a fundamental level. She wore simple, comfortable gray travel pants and a soft navy blue cashmere sweater that looked expensive but understated. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that fell gracefully over her shoulders. Her shoes were practical flats designed for comfort rather than display. To Blake, her entire existence was an affront to his exclusive experience. She didn't belong here. He was sure of it. The woman's name was Zara Monroe, though Blake had no idea he was looking at one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in America. At 34, Zara had built Phoenix Quantum Computing from nothing into an $8.2 billion empire. She held 17 patents in quantum encryption technology and had just closed the largest government contract in her industry's history. But today, she was simply a granddaughter flying to Atlanta to visit her dying grandmother. The book in her hands was The Art of War by Sun Tzu, a worn copy that had belonged to her late father. Its pages were filled with her handwritten notes and highlighted passages, wisdom she'd collected over years of building her company from her grandmother's garage. Zara was flying on her own aircraft, a $75 million Bombardier Global 7500 that she'd personally customized and named Legacy One. She'd bought it 2 years ago, not as a status symbol, but as a practical tool for her global business operations. Unlike Blake, she didn't need to perform her wealth. She simply possessed it. The private terminal buzzed with the quiet efficiency of elite travel. Other passengers moved through the space with the confident ease of people accustomed to luxury. Business executives spoke in hushed tones about million-dollar deals. Tech entrepreneurs typed furiously on laptops that cost more than most monthly salaries. A federal judge sat reading legal briefs while sipping vintage champagne. None of them paid attention to Zara. She preferred it that way. Blake, however, couldn't look away. Her very presence seemed to mock everything he believed about this world. This was his sanctuary, his exclusive domain where his family's money bought him respect and deference. Seeing her here, dressed so casually, reading an actual physical book like some kind of intellectual pretender, felt like a personal insult. Reading a book. Blake continued, his voice growing louder. A physical book. How quaint. Probably a freebie from some airport bookstore. Madison pulled out her phone and started filming. "This could be good content," she whispered. "Rich people problems, you know. My followers love this drama." Their laughter was sharp and cruel, cutting through the ambient sounds of the lounge. The woman didn't look up from her book, but a subtle tension in her shoulders suggested she heard every word. She simply turned a page, her focus seemingly unbroken. This infuriated Blake even more. His entire life was built on being acknowledged, feared, or at the very least, noticed. To be ignored by someone he deemed so far beneath him felt like a personal violation. In his world, his family name meant something. His wealth commanded attention. His presence demanded respect. But this woman was giving him none of that. Maybe she won a contest? Madison giggled, adjusting her phone angle to capture Blake's growing agitation. Be a billionaire for a day. First prize is a flight to Newark. Blake's jaw tightened. You know what I think? I think someone made a mistake. This lounge is for verified passengers only. There are protocols. A uniformed attendant approached their group with practiced professionalism. Mr. Morrison, your aircraft is ready for boarding whenever you're prepared to depart. Blake stood up with theatrical importance, handing his briefcase to the attendant like it contained state secrets instead of his iPad and protein bars. Finally, let's hope we don't have to share the cabin with unexpected passengers. He glanced one more time at Zara, who was still reading peacefully by the window. Her calm demeanor only fueled his irritation. Some people just don't understand boundaries. As Blake and Madison walked toward the glass doors leading to the tarmac, Zara finally looked up. Her eyes, deep and intelligent, followed them briefly. There was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet, weary recognition. She'd seen this performance before: the casual dismissal, the snap judgments based on her race and gender, the assumption that she didn't belong in spaces where real power gathered. For years it had fueled her ambition. Now it just made her tired. She sighed softly and placed a thin leather bookmark between the pages of her book. Standing with fluid grace, she walked toward the same glass doors, her movements unhurried and confident. Another attendant approached her with a respectful nod. "Ms. Monroe, we're ready whenever you are. Captain Valdez has the flight plan filed, and we're just waiting for your authorization." "Thank you, Marcus," Zara replied, her voice calm and melodic. "I'm ready now." She moved toward the exit, her path inevitably leading to a collision with Blake and Madison, who were busy taking selfies on the tarmac in front of a gleaming white private jet. Blake wore a self-satisfied smirk as he posed, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he had just mocked wasn't just another passenger. She was the owner of the plane. The Bombardier Global 7500 stretched magnificently across the tarmac, its pristine white fuselage gleaming in the California afternoon sun. Legacy 1 was painted in elegant script along the side, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The aircraft represented the pinnacle of private aviation technology, capable of flying non-stop for over 700 nautical miles in unprecedented comfort and luxury. Blake assumed it belonged to his father's company, Morrison Industries. Their shipping empire had partnerships with several aviation companies, and Blake had grown accustomed to flying on various corporate jets without ever bothering to learn the details. To him, they were all the same flying symbols of his family's wealth and status. Madison continued filming their arrival, narrating for her followers. "Look at this gorgeous jet, guys. Private aviation is literally the only way to travel. I can't even imagine flying commercial anymore." Blake straightened his tie and looked directly into her camera. This is how real business gets done. While everyone else is dealing with airport security and flight delays, we're already in the air." Neither of them noticed Zara approaching from behind her footsteps, silent on the tarmac. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to announce her importance to a room. Her wealth wasn't performed. It was simply there, like gravity, invisible but undeniably powerful. The boarding stairs were lowered, and Blake immediately moved toward them with the entitlement of someone who had never been denied access to anything. "Come on, Madison. Time to see how the other half lives." As he placed his foot on the first step, he had no idea that in the next few minutes his entire world would collapse. The woman walking calmly behind him wasn't just another passenger trying to sneak into first class. She was about to teach him that true power doesn't announce itself. It simply acts. Blake Morrison had never faced a closed door in his life, not literally and certainly not metaphorically. Growing up in the Morrison family meant growing up in a bubble of infinite privilege where consequences were abstract concepts that happened to other people. The Morrison Industries empire had been built by his great-grandfather, expanded ruthlessly by his grandfather, and perfected by his father, Richard Morrison. 3 generations of wealth had created a foundation so solid that Blake had never even glimpsed the ground beneath it. His childhood was a carefully curated series of exclusive experiences. Private schools where his family name guaranteed admission, and his mediocre grades were overlooked. Summer homes in the Hamptons where he learned to sail on yachts that cost more than most people's houses. Ivy League education purchased with donations that ensured his acceptance letter arrived regardless of his actual qualifications. Harvard Business School had been particularly easy for Blake, not because he was intellectually gifted, but because the Morrison name opened doors that remained locked for others. His professors knew exactly who they were dealing with, and Blake's C average was transformed into a respectable B+ through the magic of influential family connections and strategic endowments. Upon graduation, Blake was immediately installed as Vice President of Business Development at Morrison Industries. The title sounded impressive, but his actual responsibilities were limited to attending charity galas, playing golf with potential clients, and lending his family name to business relationships that had been cultivated long before he was born. His corner office overlooked Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city Blake believed belonged to him. The desk was imported Italian marble. The chairs were handcrafted leather that cost more than most people's annual salaries. His Harvard diploma hung prominently on the wall, not because he was proud of his academic achievements, but because it represented everything he believed made him superior to others. Blake's relationship with Madison Torres was equally performative. She was beautiful, Instagram famous, and Hispanic, which Blake considered evidence of his own progressive thinking. He enjoyed introducing her to his friends as his exotic girlfriend, completely oblivious to how patronizing the description sounded. Madison tolerated his casual racism because his credit card had no spending limit, and his social connections boosted her follower count. Their relationship existed primarily for public consumption. Madison provided Blake with social media credibility and visual appeal for business events. Blake provided Madison with access to exclusive parties and unlimited shopping budgets. Neither of them particularly liked the other, but they both understood the transaction. Recently, however, Blake had felt increasing pressure from his father. Richard Morrison was growing impatient with his son's lack of meaningful contribution to the company. Board members whispered about nepotism and questioned whether Blake deserved his position. The family business that had seemed like his birthright was starting to feel less certain. "Prove yourself," his father had said during their last conversation. "Show me you understand what this company represents. Show me you can handle real responsibility." The words haunted Blake because he had no idea how to prove himself. He'd never had to. Everything had always been given to him, and he'd never developed the skills necessary to actually earn anything. This insecurity manifested as aggressive overcompensation. Blake had become increasingly loud about his opinions, more dismissive of people he considered beneath him, and more desperate to assert his dominance in any situation where he felt his authority might be questioned. Today's flight to Aspen was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Madison wanted to film content at the ski resort for her social media channels. Blake wanted to network with the other wealthy vacationers and perhaps close some business deals that would impress his father. Neither of them expected to encounter someone who would challenge everything Blake believed about his place in the world. While Blake's life had been a series of handed opportunities, Zara Monroe's journey to power had been forged through brilliance, determination, and an unshakable belief that her grandmother's dreams for her were worth pursuing. Zara's story began in tragedy. When she was 8 years old, her parents died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside Atlanta. The loss devastated her world, but her grandmother Esther Monroe stepped in with the fierce love and unwavering determination that would shape Zara's character for the rest of her life. Esther Monroe was a retired schoolteacher who had spent 40 years educating children in East Atlanta's public schools. She lived in a small house with a tiny garage that would later become legendary in the tech industry, but at the time was simply where Esther kept her gardening tools and old furniture. "Smart is not enough, baby girl," Esther would tell young Zara every morning before school. "Smart without character is just cleverness. Smart with character can change the world." Zara absorbed these lessons while excelling academically in ways that amazed her teachers. She devoured books on mathematics, science, and philosophy with equal enthusiasm. By middle school, she was already reading quantum physics texts for fun. By high school, she was tutoring college students in advanced mathematics. MIT offered her a full scholarship, recognizing a once-in-a-generation intellect combined with the kind of humble determination that suggested she would use her gifts for something meaningful. Zara accepted, but not before promising her grandmother that she would never forget where she came from, or who had believed in her when no one else did. At MIT, Zara discovered her passion for quantum computing. The field was still in its infancy, but she could see its revolutionary potential with startling clarity. While her classmates struggled to grasp basic quantum mechanical principles, Zara was already envisioning practical applications that wouldn't be attempted by major corporations for another decade. She completed her undergraduate degree in 3 years with perfect grades, then earned her PhD in quantum physics by age 26. Her doctoral dissertation, Practical Applications of Quantum Entanglement in Cryptographic Protection, was immediately classified by the Department of Defense and would later form the foundation of Phoenix Quantum Computing's core technology. But Zara didn't want to work for someone else's vision. She wanted to build something that would honor her grandmother's faith in her and create opportunities for other young people who looked like her, but had never seen someone like themselves in positions of real technological power. So she returned to Atlanta, moved back into her grandmother's house, and started Phoenix Quantum Computing in the same garage where Esther stored her Christmas decorations and old teaching supplies. The early years were brutal. Zara worked 20-hour days, coding advanced algorithms on equipment she'd bought with student loans and savings from part-time jobs. She pitched her ideas to investors who smiled politely and suggested she might be better suited for less ambitious projects. Some were overtly racist. Others were subtly condescending. All of them underestimated her. "They see a young black woman from Atlanta," she told her grandmother after a particularly humiliating investor meeting where a venture capitalist had asked if she was really the technical founder or just the face of someone else's company. "They can't imagine that I might actually be the smartest person in the room." "Then don't imagine it," baby girl Esther replied. "Prove it." Zara took that advice to heart. Instead of continuing to chase investors who couldn't see her vision, she decided to build something so undeniably revolutionary that the world would have to pay attention. Working 18-hour days in her grandmother's garage, Zara developed a quantum encryption protocol that was mathematically unbreakable by any existing or theoretical computing approach. Her breakthrough came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday when she solved the equation that had stumped teams of scientists at major universities for years. She stared at her computer screen in disbelief, then ran the calculations 17 more times to make sure she hadn't made an error. Each time the results were the same. She had created something that would revolutionize digital security forever. That morning she walked into her grandmother's kitchen and quietly announced, "I think I just changed the world." Esther looked up from her morning coffee and smiled. "I always knew you would, baby girl. I just didn't know it would happen before breakfast." The quantum encryption breakthrough attracted the attention of major technology companies and government agencies almost immediately. Instead of selling her patents to the highest bidder, Zara used them as the foundation for Phoenix Quantum Computing. She maintained controlling ownership while accepting strategic investments that valued her company at $2.3 billion practically overnight. But Zara never forgot that her success was built on the shoulders of a grandmother who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table while helping her navigate homework that was often more advanced than what Esther's own college professors had studied. As Phoenix Quantum grew into a global technology leader, Zara made decisions that prioritized long-term value over short-term profits. She hired brilliant minds from underrepresented communities and paid them competitively from day one. She partnered with historically black colleges and universities to fund quantum computing research programs. She created internship opportunities for students who reminded her of herself intellectually gifted, but economically disadvantaged. The company's latest achievement was a $3.2 billion contract with the Department of Defense to develop quantum-encrypted communication networks for national security applications. The deal had been announced just 2 weeks ago, making Phoenix Quantum one of the most valuable private companies in America, and establishing Zara as one of the youngest black women to achieve billionaire status. But today, none of that mattered. Today she was simply a granddaughter making what might be her last trip to visit the woman who had shaped everything she'd become. Esther Monroe, now 87, was dying. The doctors had given her weeks, perhaps days. Zara had cleared her entire schedule to spend time with the person who had loved her unconditionally and believed in her unreasonably. She'd dressed for comfort, not for business meetings or media interviews. The navy cashmere sweater had been a gift from her grandmother. The gray travel pants were practical for a long flight. The worn copy of The Art of War contained wisdom from both Sun Tzu and Esther Monroe, whose handwritten notes filled the margins with observations about leadership strategy and the importance of knowing when to fight and when to find a better way. Zara had purchased Legacy One specifically for trips like this, moments when she needed to travel quickly and privately without the chaos of commercial aviation. The $75 million aircraft was registered under a subsidiary corporation, and she deliberately kept a low profile when flying. She preferred anonymity to celebrity substance to style. The Bombardier Global 7500 was configured exactly to her specifications. The interior featured warm wood finishes and soft leather seating in earth tones that promoted calm rather than ostentation. The cabin included a private office where she could work during long flights, a sleeping area for international travel, and a small galley stocked with her grandmother's favorite tea. Captain Ricardo Valdez had been flying for Phoenix Quantum for 3 years. A former Air Force pilot with an impeccable safety record, he understood Zara's preference for discretion and professionalism. His crew was hand-picked for competence and character rather than connections or appearance. Flight attendant Sarah Collins was a former commercial airline veteran who had joined Phoenix Aviation specifically because of Zara's reputation for treating employees with respect rather than as servants. Sarah had worked for other wealthy clients who considered crew members invisible. Zara remembered everyone's name, asked about their families, and created an environment where people felt valued rather than disposable. As Zara boarded Legacy One, she had no idea that the next few hours would become a defining moment, not just in her own life, but in the career of Blake Morrison and the corporate culture of Morrison Industries. She settled into her preferred seat, opened her book to a marked passage about the importance of knowing your enemy, and prepared for what should have been a routine flight to Atlanta. Instead, she was about to demonstrate that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to be real. Blake Morrison stepped into the cabin of Legacy One with the swagger of someone who had never been told no in any language that mattered. His Armani shoes clicked against the polished floor as he surveyed what he assumed was his father's latest acquisition in corporate aircraft. The interior was stunning warm walnut paneling, cream-colored leather seats arranged in a spacious configuration that prioritized comfort over capacity, and subtle ambient lighting that created an atmosphere of serene luxury. Everything spoke of expensive taste and careful attention to detail. "Now this is what I'm talking about," Blake announced to Madison, his voice louder than necessary in the quiet cabin. Finally, Dad springs for an upgrade. Madison was already panning her phone camera across the elegant interior. "Oh my God, you guys, this is incredible. This is literally how billionaires travel. I can't even..." Behind them, other passengers began boarding. Robert Kim, a Korean-American investment banker, carried a leather briefcase and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to high-stakes business travel. Elena Rodriguez, a federal prosecutor taking a rare vacation day, noticed the tension in the cabin almost immediately. James Parker, a tech journalist who had covered the rise of several Silicon Valley giants, sensed something newsworthy developing. Blake immediately claimed the forward seats, dropping his briefcase on 1B and settling into 1A like he was marking territory. "Madison, sit here," he directed, patting the seat beside him. "Best view, most legroom. This is where the real passengers sit." That's when he noticed Zara. She had boarded quietly and was already seated in 2A, her book open, completely absorbed in reading. Her casual attire and calm demeanor immediately triggered Blake's sense of territorial entitlement. "Excuse me," Blake called out, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I think there's been some confusion." Zara didn't look up from her book. "I don't think so." Blake blinked, startled by her calm response. He was accustomed to immediate deference when he spoke. "Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass. This section is reserved for Morrison Industries executives." Now Zara did look up, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that held no trace of intimidation or uncertainty. "Is that so?" "Yes, it is." Blake's voice carried the authority of someone who had never been questioned about anything that mattered to him. "I'm Blake Morrison, Vice President of Business Development. This is my family's aircraft." Sarah Collins, the flight attendant, approached with professional courtesy. "Is there an issue, Mr. Morrison?" Blake gestured toward Zara without taking his eyes off her. "Yes, there seems to be a seating problem. I think this passenger might be confused about where she belongs." Sarah glanced at her passenger manifest, then at Zara, then back at Blake with barely concealed discomfort. "Sir, I can assure you that all passengers are seated correctly according to our flight plan." "According to your flight plan?" Blake's voice rose slightly. "I'm telling you this is Morrison Industries property, and I don't recognize this woman as one of our authorized passengers." Madison continued filming whispering commentary to her phone. "This is so awkward, guys. Blake is literally having to explain business protocol to someone who obviously doesn't understand how private aviation works." Robert Kim, seated across the aisle, quietly activated his phone's camera. As someone who had witnessed discrimination in corporate settings before, he recognized the dynamics unfolding and wanted to document whatever happened next. Elena Rodriguez shifted in her seat, her prosecutor's instincts immediately alert to what appeared to be racial profiling in progress. She had seen this exact scenario play out in courtrooms, assumptions about who belonged where, based purely on appearance. James Parker opened his laptop and began typing notes. His journalist's sense was tingling with the possibility that he was witnessing something significant. Blake stood up, his height and expensive suit meant to intimidate. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to show me your ticket and explain how you gained access to this aircraft. Zara closed her book, slowly marking her place with a leather bookmark. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured. I don't need to explain anything to you. Actually, you do. Blake's entitlement was now in full display. This is private property and you're trespassing. I have every right to verify passenger credentials. Do you? Zara asked quietly. Blake pulled out his Morrison Industries business card and held it out like a badge of authority. I represent Morrison Industries. My father is Richard Morrison, CEO of the Morrison shipping empire. This aircraft is part of our corporate fleet, and I'm responsible for security protocol. Madison giggled nervously. Blake knows everyone who's supposed to be on these flights. It's like super exclusive. Zara looked at the business card but didn't take it. How interesting. Blake's frustration was building. He wasn't accustomed to this level of resistance to his authority. Look, I don't know how you got past security, but this isn't going to work. You need to move to the back of the aircraft where there are appropriate seats for... He paused, choosing his words carefully. For passengers of your ticket level. The cabin fell silent except for the quiet hum of the aircraft's approaches. Everyone was now watching the confrontation unfold. Robert Kim's camera captured every word. Elena Rodriguez took detailed notes on her phone, her legal training automatically documenting what appeared to be a clear case of discrimination. James Parker recognized he was witnessing something that could become a major story. Sarah Collins looked between Blake and Zara, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but uncertain about proper protocol when passengers disputed each other's right to be on board. My ticket level. Zara repeated, her voice still calm, but with an edge that suggested Blake was venturing into dangerous territory. Yes. This is first class. Premium seating. I don't know what kind of deal you got or who you know, but these seats are reserved for verified business travelers. Madison lowered her phone slightly, starting to sense that Blake might be going too far. Blake, maybe we should just... No, Blake cut her off. This is exactly the kind of situation that causes problems. People trying to game the company, trying to get access to services they haven't paid for. He looked directly at Zara. I don't know what your angle is, but it's not going to work. Zara stood up slowly, her movement fluid and controlled. At 5'8", she was nearly as tall as Blake, and her presence commanded the space in a way that surprised him. My angle. Yes? Your angle. Your scheme. Whatever you're trying to pull here. Blake's voice was getting louder, his entitlement overriding any sense of basic courtesy. I've seen this before, people who think they can just walk into private aviation and pretend they belong. The racist implications of his words hung in the air like smoke. Elena Rodriguez spoke up from her seat. Sir, perhaps you should consider. Blake spun around to face her. Ma'am, this is not your concern. This is a business matter between Morrison Industries and an unauthorized passenger. An unauthorized passenger. Zara's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath the silk. Is that what I am? Unless you can prove otherwise? Yes. Blake was now fully committed to his position, his pride preventing him from backing down even as he sensed he might be making a mistake. Show me your credentials. Show me your ticket. Show me what gives you the right to be in this seat. Captain Ricardo Valdez emerged from the cockpit, drawn by the raised voices. A dignified man in his mid-40s with 20 years of aviation experience, he immediately assessed the situation with professional concern. Is there a problem here? Captain Valdez asked. Blake turned to him with relief. Yes, Captain, there is. This passenger doesn't seem to have proper authorization for premium seating. I need you to verify the manifest and resolve this issue. Captain Valdez looked at Zara, and something passed between them, a look of recognition and respect that Blake completely missed. Sir, the captain said carefully. All passengers aboard this aircraft are properly manifested and authorized. That can't be right, Blake insisted. I'm telling you, this woman doesn't belong in first class. She's obviously not a Morrison Industries executive or client. Obviously, Zara asked. Blake realized he was being baited, but couldn't stop himself. Yes, obviously. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but there are standards. There are protocols. People can't just show up and expect to access premium services. Madison grabbed his arm. Blake, seriously, maybe we should. No. Blake shook her off. I'm not backing down from this. I have a responsibility to my family's company to ensure proper security measures. He pulled out his phone. You know what I'm calling security. Let them sort this out. Zara watched him dial with the calm patience of someone watching a child throw a tantrum. Security. Yes, security. Airport Security Company. Security, whoever needs to be involved to remove unauthorized passengers from corporate aircraft. Blake held the phone to his ear, waiting for someone to answer. Yes, this is Blake Morrison calling about a security issue at What's Our Tail Number? He looked around frantically. Captain Valdez answered quietly. November 847, Quebec. Mike. November 847, Quebec, Mike. Blake repeated into the phone. I need someone to verify passenger credentials for an unauthorized individual attempting to access premium cabin services. While Blake was on the phone, Zara calmly opened her purse and pulled out her own phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Blake Madison whispered urgently, I really think you should hang up. But Blake was too far committed to turn back. His pride, his sense of entitlement, and his desperate need to prove his authority had created a momentum he couldn't stop. Yes, I'll hold, he said into his phone, then looked at Zara triumphantly. Security is on their way. We'll get this sorted out properly. Zara pressed a contact on her phone and held it to her ear. When someone answered, she spoke in the same calm, measured tone she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. Captain Valdez, this is Zara Monroe. Blake stopped talking mid-sentence into his phone. Yes, your boss. We have a situation in the cabin that needs to be addressed immediately. Blake's face began to change as the words registered. I need you to make an announcement to all passengers that this is a private flight on my personal aircraft Legacy 1. The phone slipped slightly in Blake's hand. Also, please inform whoever Mr. Morrison contacted that their services won't be needed. The security situation has resolved itself. Blake's mouth opened and closed without sound. Thank you, Captain. Please proceed when you're ready. Zara ended the call and looked directly at Blake, who was still holding his phone to his ear, like a lifeline to his old reality. Did you have something you wanted to tell me about credentials? She asked quietly. Blake's phone was still connected to airport security, and the voice on the other end was asking for confirmation of the emergency. He hung up without answering. Captain Valdez cleared his throat and spoke to the entire cabin over the intercom approach. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I've been asked to inform all passengers that you are aboard Legacy 1, the private aircraft of Ms. Zara Monroe, CEO of Phoenix Quantum Computing. All passengers on board today are her personal guests. We'll be departing shortly for Atlanta. The cabin fell completely silent except for the quiet hum of the aircraft's environmental approaches. Madison stopped filming and slowly lowered her phone. Robert Kim saved his video file with careful precision. Elena Rodriguez looked at Blake with the expression of someone who had just watched a case close itself. James Parker typed furiously on his laptop, recognizing that he had just witnessed something extraordinary. Sarah Collins smiled professionally and asked, Would anyone like beverages before takeoff? Blake stood frozen in place, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. The woman he had tried to have removed from his family's aircraft was actually the owner. The credentials he had demanded to see were worth $8.2 billion. The unauthorized passenger he had called security about was one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in America. "Your aircraft," he whispered. Zara settled back into her seat and reopened her book. "My aircraft. But Morrison Industries." "What about Morrison Industries?" Zara asked without looking up. Blake's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed his father's office number. With trembling fingers, he answered. "Blake." Richard Morrison's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "What the hell did you just do, Dad? Phoenix Quantum Computing just pulled out of the largest acquisition deal in our company's history." They cited character assessment failure as the reason. "What did you do?" Blake looked at Zara, who was calmly reading her book as if nothing had happened. "Dad, I think I made a mistake. You think you just cost this company $2.3 billion and possibly our reputation. How is that possible?" Blake couldn't speak. The magnitude of what he had done was beginning to sink in. "I want you in my office Monday morning," Richard Morrison continued. "And Blake, start updating your resume." The line went dead. Blake lowered his phone and looked around the cabin. Every passenger was staring at him with expressions ranging from pity to disgust to professional curiosity. Madison had tears in her eyes. "Blake, what just happened?" Blake sat down heavily in his seat, finally understanding that his life had just changed forever. The woman he had tried to humiliate had turned out to be the most powerful person on the aircraft. His attempt to assert authority had revealed him as a prejudiced fool. His family's business deal was destroyed. His job was in jeopardy, and his humiliation was being recorded for posterity. Zara turned a page in her book. Outside the windows, Legacy 1 began to taxi toward the runway. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Blake Morrison sat frozen in his seat, his designer suit suddenly feeling like a costume that no longer fit his role in the world. His phone lay in his lap, the screen dark, but still radiating the heat of his father's fury through its silent surface. Zara Monroe continued reading, her calm demeanor unchanged by the chaos she had just unleashed with a single phone call. The worn pages of The Art of War held her attention as if nothing remarkable had happened, as if she hadn't just destroyed a man's career with the quiet efficiency of someone swatting a mosquito. Madison Torres sat beside Blake with tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Her phone, which moments ago had been capturing content for her 2.1 million followers, now seemed like evidence of her complicity in something she was only beginning to understand. The comments on her Instagram stories were already turning negative as her followers realized what they had witnessed. "Blake," she whispered, "please, tell me this is some kind of mistake." Blake couldn't answer. His throat felt constricted, as if the oxygen in the cabin had suddenly become too thin to breathe. The reality of what he had done was settling over him like concrete, heavy and inescapable. Robert Kim discreetly saved the video file to his cloud storage and sent copies to 3 different email addresses. As an investment banker who had spent years documenting corporate malfeasance, he understood the importance of preserving evidence when powerful people made catastrophic mistakes. Elena Rodriguez was already composing notes in her legal pad, her prosecutor's instincts automatically cataloging the discrimination she had witnessed for future reference. In her 15 years of civil rights law, she had seen few cases as clear-cut as what had just unfolded. James Parker typed rapidly on his laptop, crafting the opening lines of what he already knew would be the biggest story of his journalism career. Tech industry power dynamics. Corporate discrimination, instant karma. This had all the elements of a viral sensation that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Sarah Collins moved through the cabin with professional grace, offering beverages as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Years of experience in private aviation had taught her that wealthy passengers often behaved badly, but she had never witnessed someone self-destruct quite so completely. Captain Valdez returned to the cockpit to prepare for takeoff, but not before glancing once more at Zara, with the respect of someone who understood exactly what kind of leader she was. In 3 years of flying for Phoenix Quantum, he had seen her handle dozens of high-stakes business situations with the same calm control she had just displayed. Blake finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ms. Monroe, I need to apologize. I made a terrible mistake." Zara looked up from her book, her expression neutral. "Did you... Yes, I thought this was my family's aircraft. I didn't realize, I didn't know who you were." "Why does who I am matter?" Zara asked quietly. "Would your behavior have been acceptable if I had been anyone else?" Blake's mouth opened and closed without sound. The question cut to the heart of everything wrong with how he had acted, and they both knew it. "I was trying to protect company property," he said weakly. "No," Zara replied. "You were trying to put me in what you thought was my place. There's a difference." Madison sobbed quietly beside him. Her Instagram followers were already abandoning her account in droves, and several major brand partnerships had sent urgent messages requesting immediate calls to discuss terminating their relationships. Blake's phone buzzed again. This time it was the Morrison Industries board chairman. "Blake, what the hell happened with Phoenix Quantum? Your father is calling an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. You need to explain how you single-handedly destroyed the biggest deal in company history." Blake hung up without responding. More calls were coming in business partners, family friends, colleagues who had heard the news through the intricate networks of corporate gossip that moved faster than any official communication. "How did you know?" Blake asked Zara desperately. "How did you know about the Morrison Industries deal?" Zara held up her phone, showing him a brief email thread. Phoenix Quantum was in final negotiations to acquire Morrison Industries' shipping data analytics division for $2.3 billion. The deal was scheduled to close next week pending final due diligence. Blake's face went ashen. "You were buying us?" was being the operative phrase, Zara confirmed. "Character assessment is part of our due diligence process. When we're acquiring companies, we need to understand the culture we'd be inheriting, and I just failed your character assessment." Blake said, the full magnitude of his situation finally becoming clear. Spectacularly, Zara agreed. Blake's phone rang again. This time it was his father calling directly. "Dad, don't speak." Richard Morrison's voice was ice cold. "Just listen. In 30 years of business, I have never been more humiliated. The CEO of Phoenix Quantum just called me personally to explain that the acquisition is canceled because my son demonstrated fundamental character flaws that are incompatible with corporate partnership." Blake could hear keyboard typing in the background, suggesting his father was already implementing damage control measures. "She was very professional about it," Richard continued. "She said she understands that family members don't always represent company values, but that the incident raised too many questions about Morrison Industries' corporate culture for her to feel comfortable proceeding." "Dad, I can fix this." "No, you can't. Do you understand what you've done? This wasn't just about money. Phoenix Quantum was going to be our entry into next-generation logistics technology. Their quantum computing applications could have revolutionized our entire industry, and you destroyed it because you couldn't handle seeing a black woman in first class." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that would never be extinguished. "That's not—" "I wasn't," Blake began. "Yes, you were," Richard said. "I've seen the video." Blake's blood turned to ice water. "Video? It's already circulating through private business networks. By tomorrow, it'll probably be public. You called security on a woman for the crime of being successful while black. And you did it while representing my company. Robert Kim looked up from his phone and nodded slightly toward Blake. The video was indeed already making its way through investment banking circles, shared among professionals who understood its significance. The board is meeting Monday morning, Richard continued. Your employment with Morrison Industries is terminated effective immediately. Your corporate credit cards are canceled. Your company car will be repossessed. Your access to all company facilities has been revoked. Blake felt the world spinning around him. Dad, please. You're not my business partner anymore, Blake. At this point, I'm not sure you're my son. Figure out your own way home. The line went dead. Blake stared at his phone as the implications crashed over him like successive waves. No job, no income, no company support, no family business to inherit. Madison was already planning her exit strategy, and his social circle would evaporate the moment word spread about what he had done. Blake Madison whispered, "My followers are asking if we're really dating. My brand manager says I need to distance myself from whatever this is." She was already editing her Instagram bio, removing any reference to their relationship. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her legal notes. Mr. Morrison, I feel compelled to inform you that what I witnessed today constitutes textbook discrimination under federal civil rights law. If this had occurred in a place of public accommodation, you could face both criminal charges and civil liability. James Parker saved his story draft and looked at Blake with professional sympathy. Mr. Morrison, would you like to provide a statement for the record? This story will be published whether or not you participate, but you might want the opportunity to explain your perspective. Blake couldn't form words. The reality of his situation was too enormous to process. He had destroyed his career, his family's business deal, his relationship, his reputation, and possibly his inheritance in the span of 10 minutes. Zara closed her book and looked directly at him. Mr. Morrison, do you understand what just happened here? Blake nodded mutely. You made assumptions about me based on my appearance. You tried to use your perceived authority to put me in what you thought was my place. You called security to have me removed from my own aircraft. You did all of this because you couldn't imagine that a black woman in comfortable clothes might actually belong in first class. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, cutting away his excuses and rationalizations until only the ugly truth remained. Yes, Blake whispered. And now you're experiencing consequences for those choices, Zara continued. Not because I'm vindictive, but because character matters in business. Trust matters. Respect matters. Your actions demonstrated that you lack the basic human decency required for professional partnership. Blake looked around the cabin at the other passengers, all of whom were documenting or witnessing his complete downfall. What happens now? Zara reopened her book. Now you learn to live with the choices you made, the same way everyone you've ever dismissed or discriminated against has had to live with your choices. Outside the windows, Legacy 1 lifted smoothly into the sky, carrying Blake Morrison toward the first day of a very different life than the one he had woken up expecting to live. The aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude while Blake stared out the window at a world that suddenly looked very different from 40,000 feet. He was no longer the privileged heir to a business empire. He was unemployed, publicly humiliated, and facing the prospect of explaining to everyone he knew how he had managed to destroy everything in a single conversation. Zara turned a page in her book and continued reading as if nothing remarkable had happened, because to her it hadn't. She had simply revealed the truth about who Blake Morrison really was, and the world had responded accordingly. Justice, it turned out, didn't require raising your voice. Sometimes it just required owning the plane. The news spread through corporate America like wildfire in drought conditions. Within 2 hours of Legacy 1 reaching cruising altitude, Robert Kim's video had been shared across private business networks, forwarded through executive email chains, and discussed in boardrooms from Manhattan to Silicon Valley. The footage was crystal clear. Blake Morrison, heir to the Morrison Industries empire, attempting to have a black woman removed from first class, only to discover she owned the aircraft. By the time the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Blake's professional obituary was already being written across multiple industries. Morrison Industries' stock price began its downward spiral before the markets even opened Monday morning. Pre-market trading showed a 15% drop as investors processed the implications of losing the Phoenix Quantum deal and the viral humiliation of the company's heir apparent. Richard Morrison spent the remainder of his weekend in emergency conference calls with the board of directors, public relations firms, and legal counsel. The Morrison family had built their reputation over 3 generations, and Blake had managed to damage it irreparably in less time than it took most people to order coffee. "How do we contain this?" asked Margaret Hendricks, Morrison Industries' chief communications officer, during a Sunday evening crisis meeting. "We can't," replied legal counsel David Park. "The video is already being shared on social media. By tomorrow morning, it'll be front-page business news. Our only option is to get ahead of the story and demonstrate that Blake's behavior doesn't represent company values." Richard Morrison stared out the window of his Manhattan office at the city lights below. Each point of light represented a potential business relationship that could now be compromised by his son's actions. "Recommendations?" he asked quietly. "Complete disavowal," Margaret said, without hesitation. "Public statement condemning Blake's behavior, immediate termination donation to civil rights organizations, and a comprehensive review of company culture and diversity policies." And personally, David Park consulted his legal notes. "Financially, you need to insulate the family assets from any potential lawsuits. Publicly, you need to distance yourself from Blake's actions while taking responsibility as a father who failed to instill proper values." Richard Morrison was 72 years old. He had spent 50 years building Morrison Industries into a logistics empire worth billions of dollars. He had survived recessions, technological disruptions, and competitive challenges that had destroyed other family businesses. But he had never faced a crisis created by his own son's moral failures. Meanwhile, Blake sat in his first-class seat on Legacy One, watching his entire existence disintegrate through his phone screen. Text messages flooded in from friends, colleagues, and business contacts, each one a variation of the same theme: disbelief, disappointment, and distance. His college roommate dude. What the hell? The video is everywhere. His country club golf partner, Blake. "I think we should postpone our partnership discussions indefinitely. His Harvard Business School networking group, Blake Morrison, has been removed from our alumni directory pending review." Madison Torres was already executing her exit strategy with the ruthless efficiency of someone who understood that social media success required cutting ties with toxic associations immediately. She deleted every photo of Blake from her Instagram account, unfriended him on all platforms, and posted a carefully crafted statement distancing herself from his actions. "I'm deeply disturbed by the behavior I witnessed today," her statement read. "Discrimination and prejudice have no place in my life or my brand. I will not be associated with anyone who treats others with such disrespect." The statement received 50,000 likes within an hour, and Madison's follower count actually increased as people praised her for taking a stand. She had successfully transformed Blake's downfall into her own moral victory. Blake watched it all happen in real time, powerless to stop the cascade of consequences that had been triggered by his own actions. His throat felt constricted as if the cabin pressure was insufficient for breathing. His hands shook as he scrolled through message after message of professional and personal rejection. Elena Rodriguez had spent the flight drafting a detailed incident report documenting every word and action she had witnessed. As a federal prosecutor, she understood the legal implications of what had occurred and wanted to preserve a complete record. Mr. Morrison demonstrated clear racial bias in his treatment of Ms. Monroe, she wrote. His assumptions were based solely on her race and appearance, and his actions constituted harassment and attempted false imprisonment. If this had occurred in a commercial setting, criminal charges would be appropriate. James Parker was already conducting phone interviews with industry experts for his story. The narrative was writing itself, entitled, "Heir Destroys Family Business Through Racist Behavior, Proves That Wealth Without Character is Meaningless." This is a perfect example of how privilege can blind people to their own prejudices, said Dr. Angela Freeman, a professor of business ethics at Stanford, whom James contacted for comment. Blake Morrison felt entitled to police who belonged in first class, based on his assumptions about race and social status. The irony that he was wrong about everything makes this a powerful teaching moment. Phoenix Quantum's communications team had prepared a brief statement. Phoenix Quantum Computing has terminated acquisition discussions with Morrison Industries due to fundamental incompatibilities in corporate values. We remain committed to partnerships with organizations that share our principles of respect, inclusion, and human dignity. The statement was professional, measured, and devastating. It confirmed that Blake's behavior had destroyed a $2.3 billion business deal while maintaining the moral high ground that made Phoenix Quantum look even more impressive by comparison. Zara Monroe continued reading her book as if nothing remarkable had happened occasionally, glancing at her phone to monitor the developing situation. She felt no satisfaction from Blake's downfall, only a weary familiarity with the consequences of prejudice, finally catching up with someone who had never faced accountability before. Ms. Monroe, Sarah Collins, approached discreetly. "We'll be landing in approximately 30 minutes. Is there anything you need?" "No, thank you, Sarah. This has been exactly the flight I expected." Blake looked up from his phone with desperate eyes. "Ms. Monroe, please. There has to be something I can do to fix this. Some way to make amends." Zara looked at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout their confrontation. "What would you like to fix, Mr. Morrison? Your behavior or its consequences?" "Both," Blake said quickly. "I want to apologize properly. I want to make things right." "Making things right would require understanding why you were wrong," Zara replied. "Do you understand that?" Blake nodded frantically. "Yes, I see it now. I made assumptions based on prejudice. I was wrong about everything. Were you wrong, or were you caught?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Blake's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to form an answer that wouldn't further incriminate him. I want to be better," he finally said. "Wanting is not the same as being," Zara observed. "Character isn't about what you want to be when people are watching. It's about who you are when you think no one will hold you accountable." Blake's phone buzzed with another call from his father. This time, he didn't answer. "The Morrison Industries board has scheduled an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Richard Morrison's voicemail message said. "Your actions have put the entire company at risk. 3 major clients have already called to express concerns about our corporate culture. The Hendricks family is reconsidering their shipping contracts. The Patterson Group wants assurances that they won't be associated with discriminatory practices." Blake deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. Robert Kim was already fielding calls from business journalists who had seen his video. Major news outlets wanted to interview him about what he had witnessed, and he was carefully considering which platforms would give the story the most meaningful coverage. "This isn't about revenge," he explained to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. "It's about accountability. People need to see that actions have consequences, even when you're wealthy and connected." As Legacy One began its final descent into Atlanta, Blake Morrison contemplated the ruins of his life. 12 hours ago, he had been the heir to a business empire engaged to an Instagram influencer and confident in his place at the top of society's hierarchy. Now he was unemployed, single, and facing the prospect of becoming a cautionary tale about privilege and prejudice. The airplane touched down smoothly at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Outside the windows, Georgia stretched under the evening sky, indifferent to the dramas that had played out at 40,000 feet. Zara Monroe gathered her belongings with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout the flight. She had a grandmother to visit, and that was infinitely more important than Blake Morrison's self-inflicted catastrophe. Blake remained seated as the other passengers deplaned, unsure of what came next. For the first time in his privileged life, he had no safety net, no family resources to cushion his fall, and no clear path forward. Madison Torres had already posted her breakup announcement and was trending on social media as people praised her for standing up to discrimination. Her follower count was higher than ever, and new brand partnership offers were flooding her inbox. Elena Rodriguez planned to use the incident as a case study in her discrimination law seminars, demonstrating how prejudice could destroy both its targets and its perpetrators. James Parker was already writing the follow-up articles that would track Blake's downfall and Morrison Industries' attempted recovery. And Zara Monroe was thinking about her grandmother, who had taught her that dignity was something you carried inside yourself, not something you demanded from others. "Mr. Morrison," she said as she prepared to leave the aircraft, "I hope you learned something useful from this experience. The world needs fewer people like you were today, and more people like you might become tomorrow." Blake watched her walk away with the grace and confidence of someone who had never doubted her right to exist in any space she chose to occupy. She left behind a man whose assumptions about power, privilege, and place had been shattered as completely as everything else in his formerly comfortable world. The plane was empty except for Blake, who sat alone with his phone watching his old life disappear one deleted contact at a time. The video of Blake Morrison's humiliation reached viral status by Monday morning. #PrivateJetKaren began trending globally as millions of viewers watched a privileged heir attempt to remove a black woman from first class only to discover she owned the aircraft. The hashtag became a cultural touchstone for discussions about privilege prejudice and the importance of not judging people by their appearance. Within 48 hours, the incident had been covered by every major news outlet in America. Business networks analyzed the corporate implications. Social justice advocates used it as an example of everyday discrimination. Aviation industry publications examined the protocol failures that allowed such a confrontation to occur. Morrison Industries faced an avalanche of consequences that extended far beyond the canceled Phoenix Quantum deal. Major clients began reviewing their contracts, questioning whether they wanted to be associated with a company whose leadership had demonstrated such poor judgment. Stock prices plummeted as investors worried about reputational damage and future business prospects. Richard Morrison called an emergency board meeting for Monday at 8 a.m. The Manhattan conference room was filled with grim faces as board members reviewed the financial and reputational damage caused by Blake's actions. Preliminary analysis shows immediate losses of $2.8 billion in market capitalization, reported CFO Patricia Williams. 3 major shipping contracts are under review by clients who want assurances about our corporate culture. The Hendricks Group has suspended all new business pending our response to this crisis. Board Chairman Margaret Hendricks, no relation to the Hendricks Group, spoke with the authority of someone who had guided Morrison Industries through previous challenges. "Richard, we need decisive action. This cannot be seen as a family business protecting its own at the expense of corporate values." Richard Morrison, looking every one of his 72 years, nodded slowly. "I understand. What are your recommendations?" Legal counsel. David Park consulted his notes. Complete separation from Blake's actions both legally and financially. Public condemnation of his behavior. Substantial donations to civil rights organizations, and implementation of comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs across all company operations. And Blake himself, permanent termination. No severance, no family business inheritance, complete financial separation. The company cannot be seen as enabling or excusing discriminatory behavior. The decision was unanimous. Blake Morrison would be permanently severed from Morrison Industries, losing not only his current position but any future claim to the family business he had expected to inherit. The public statement was released that afternoon. Morrison Industries categorically condemns the discriminatory behavior exhibited by former employee Blake Morrison. His actions do not represent our company values and are incompatible with our commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. Mr. Morrison's employment has been terminated, and he will have no future role in company operations. We are implementing comprehensive policy reviews and diversity training programs to ensure such behavior never occurs again within our organization. The statement was accompanied by a $50 million donation to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the announcement of a partnership with Howard University's Business School to create internship and scholarship programs for underrepresented students. But the damage to Morrison Industries went beyond financial losses. The company's reputation, built over 3 generations, had been tarnished by one man's prejudiced assumptions. Competitors used the incident to question Morrison Industries' corporate culture in sales presentations to potential clients. Phoenix Quantum Computing, meanwhile, experienced the opposite effect. Zara Monroe's calm handling of the situation and her company's principled response to Blake's behavior enhanced their reputation as an organization that prioritized character alongside capability. The Morrison Industries incident demonstrates exactly why character assessment is part of our due diligence process, Zara explained during a Forbes interview. We don't just evaluate companies' financial performance. We examine their values, their culture, and their commitment to treating all stakeholders with respect. The canceled acquisition funds were redirected toward Phoenix Quantum's new Quantum Opportunity Initiative, a $2.3 billion program designed to support minority-owned technology startups and fund quantum computing research at historically black colleges and universities. Every crisis creates opportunities, Zara announced at the initiative's launch event. The Morrison Industries situation reminded us that there are better ways to invest our resources than acquiring companies that don't share our values. The initiative attracted global attention as other major technology companies pledged matching funds and support. What had started as Blake Morrison's discriminatory behavior had inadvertently created one of the largest minority business development programs in American history. Dr. Angela Freeman at Stanford Business School quickly incorporated the incident into her business ethics curriculum. The Morrison case study demonstrates how individual prejudice can destroy corporate value, she explained to her students. Blake Morrison's assumptions about race and class cost his family's company billions of dollars and decades of reputation building. Harvard Business School. Blake's alma mater faced uncomfortable questions about their alumni screening and character development programs. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of their admission policies and curriculum requirements. Private aviation companies across the industry implemented new training protocols to prevent similar incidents. The National Business Aviation Association issued guidelines for handling passenger disputes and discrimination complaints. Elena Rodriguez used her detailed incident report to develop training materials for prosecutors handling discrimination cases. The Morrison video provides clear documentation of racial profiling in action, she explained in a law review article. It shows how quickly assumptions can escalate into harassment and attempted false imprisonment. James Parker's investigative reporting revealed that Blake Morrison's behavior was not an isolated incident. Former employees of Morrison Industries shared stories of a corporate culture that tolerated casual racism and discriminatory practices, particularly toward vendors and service providers from minority communities. Blake Morrison wasn't an anomaly, Parker wrote in his follow-up article. He was a product of a company culture that never held privileged employees accountable for prejudiced behavior. The only difference was that this time he targeted someone with the power to fight back. The article prompted additional investigations into Morrison Industries' hiring practices, vendor relationships, and internal culture. Several former employees filed discrimination lawsuits citing Blake's behavior as evidence of broader company problems. Captain Ricardo Valdez became an inadvertent spokesman for professional integrity in the aviation industry. His respectful treatment of Zara Monroe and calm handling of the confrontation were held up as examples of proper crew behavior under pressure. Captain Valdez understood immediately that his loyalty was to aviation safety and professional standards, not to passenger prejudices, explained Barbara Hughes, president of the Professional Pilots Association. His actions demonstrate how crew members should respond when passengers behave inappropriately. Phoenix Quantum offered Valdez a promotion to chief pilot for their expanding aviation division, recognizing his professionalism and character under pressure. Sarah Collins received similar recognition for her handling of the situation. Her calm professionalism and respectful treatment of all passengers became a training model for private aviation crew members industry-wide. Robert Kim's decision to document the incident sparked discussions about bystander responsibility in discrimination situations. His video provided crucial evidence that prevented Blake Morrison from controlling the narrative about what had occurred. Mr. Kim understood that silence enables discrimination, explained Dr. Maria Santos, a civil rights attorney who used the incident in her advocacy work. His decision to record the confrontation ensured that the truth couldn't be distorted or denied. The incident prompted broader conversations about privilege, accountability, and the assumptions people make about who belongs in exclusive spaces. Social media discussions used #PrivateJet Karen to share stories of discrimination in restaurants, hotels, retail stores, and other businesses where people were judged by their appearance rather than their actual status or credentials. Madison Torres managed to transform her proximity to the incident into a platform for discussing social justice issues. Her immediate breakup with Blake and public condemnation of his behavior earned praise from her followers and attracted new brand partnerships with companies focused on diversity and inclusion. I couldn't remain silent when I witnessed such blatant discrimination she posted to her 2.3 million followers. Sometimes you have to choose between comfort and character. I choose character every time. Her follower count grew to over 3 million as people applauded her willingness to sacrifice a relationship for principles. Within 6 months, Morrison Industries was sold to a German logistics conglomerate for significantly less than its pre-incident value. The Morrison family name was retired from corporate operations, ending 3 generations of business leadership. Richard Morrison used the sale proceeds to establish the Morrison Foundation for Corporate Character Education, acknowledging his family's failure to instill proper values and working to prevent similar failures in other organizations. "I failed as a father and as a business leader," he said in his final interview as Morrison Industries CEO. "My son's behavior was a reflection of values I failed to teach and accountability I failed to enforce. I hope our foundation can help other families and companies avoid making the same mistakes." Blake Morrison himself disappeared from public view after the incident. Reports suggested he had moved to a small town in Oregon, where he worked at a nonprofit organization teaching computer skills to underserved communities. He declined all interview requests and maintained complete silence about the incident that had destroyed his former life. The broader impact of the Morrison incident extended beyond individual careers and corporate restructuring. It became a cultural moment that highlighted how quickly assumptions about race, class, and belonging could destroy lives and businesses. Universities added the Morrison case to their business ethics curricula. Corporate training programs used the video to demonstrate the real-world consequences of discriminatory behavior. Civil rights organizations pointed to it as evidence that discrimination remained a persistent problem in American business culture. Most importantly, the incident demonstrated that accountability was possible, even for privileged individuals who had never faced consequences for their prejudiced behavior. The viral nature of the confrontation ensured that Blake Morrison's actions would serve as a permanent warning about the dangers of judging people by their appearance rather than their character. Zara Monroe continued building Phoenix Quantum Computing into a global technology leader while expanding her philanthropic efforts to create opportunities for underrepresented communities in science and technology. The Morrison incident became a footnote in her much larger story of using wealth and power to create positive change in the world. 6 months after the incident that destroyed his former life, Blake Morrison stood in the back of Pleasant Hill Baptist Church in East Atlanta, watching a funeral service for a woman he had never met, but who had shaped the life of someone he would never forget. Esther Monroe had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days earlier, surrounded by family, and holding the hand of her granddaughter, the woman whose quiet dignity had revealed everything hollow about Blake's character. The church was filled beyond capacity. Phoenix Quantum employees had flown in from across the country to honor the grandmother who had raised their CEO. Community members who remembered Mrs. Monroe's 40 years of teaching filled every pew. Technology industry leaders sat beside local residents, all united in their respect for a woman who had lived her values rather than merely professing them. Blake wore clothes he had purchased at a thrift store in Portland, Oregon, where he now worked at a nonprofit organization called Tech Bridge, teaching computer skills to immigrants and low-income families. His designer suits were gone sold to help pay rent on a studio apartment near the community center, where he spent his days trying to rebuild some sense of purpose from the ashes of his former existence. He had driven 16 hours to attend the funeral, not because he expected to be welcomed, but because he needed to pay respects to the woman whose granddaughter had taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. Zara Monroe stood at the podium wearing a simple black dress that somehow conveyed more elegance than any of the designer outfits Blake remembered from their previous encounter. Her voice was steady and strong as she spoke about her grandmother's legacy. Grandma Esther used to tell me that character isn't what you do when people are watching, Zara said, her words carrying to every corner of the crowded church. Character is what you do when you think nobody will hold you accountable. She lived that truth every single day for 87 years. Blake felt tears on his cheeks as he listened to stories about Esther Monroe's life. How she had worked 3 jobs to support Zara after her parents died. How she had converted her garage into a makeshift laboratory where a brilliant young woman could build quantum computers from spare parts and infinite determination. How she had never complained about the sacrifices required to raise a genius granddaughter on a teacher's pension. She taught me that wealth without character is just money. Zara continued. That power without purpose is just privilege. That success without service is just selfishness. Everything I've built, everything I've achieved, every decision I've made that mattered, it all started with the values she taught me in this community, in this church, in the small house where love was always more abundant than money. After the service, as mourners gathered outside the church sharing memories and offering condolences, Blake approached Zara with the careful hesitation of someone who understood he had no right to her attention or forgiveness. "Ms. Monroe," he said quietly, "I wanted to pay my respects. I know I don't belong here, but I needed to honor your grandmother's memory." Zara looked at him with the same calm assessment she had shown during their confrontation on Legacy 1. Blake looked different, thinner, humbler, wearing clothes that spoke of financial struggle rather than inherited privilege. "Blake Morrison," she said. "I heard you were working in Oregon." "Yes, ma'am. Tech Bridge Community Center in Portland, teaching basic computer skills, helping people with job applications, that sort of thing." Blake's voice carried none of the entitlement or aggression that had characterized their previous encounter. "I wanted you to know that I think about that day every single morning when I wake up." "Do you?" "Yes. I think about how wrong I was about everything that mattered, how my assumptions revealed who I really was underneath all the privilege and entitlement." Blake paused, struggling to find words adequate for what he needed to say. "I've spent 6 months trying to understand how I became that person, and another 6 months trying to become someone different." Zara studied his face with the careful attention of someone evaluating sincerity. "And what have you learned?" "That character isn't something you inherit or buy or fake until you make it," Blake said. "It's something you build through how you treat people when you have power over them. and I failed that test completely. A small girl, perhaps 8 years old, tugged on Zara's dress. Miss Zara, my mama says you started your company in a garage just like ours. Is that true? Zara knelt down to meet the child's eyes. That's exactly right. What's your name, sweetheart? Destiny. Destiny Williams. I want to be a scientist like you, but my teacher says girls like me don't usually do that kind of work. Blake watched as Zara's expression hardened with familiar recognition. This was how discrimination began, with lowered expectations disguised as practical advice. Destiny. Zara said firmly, your teacher is wrong. Girls exactly like you change the world every single day. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't become. The little girl beamed and ran back to her family, already talking excitedly about becoming a scientist. Blake pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Ms. Monroe, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to have this. Zara opened the envelope to find a handwritten letter and a check for $10,000 made out to the Phoenix Quantum Opportunity Initiative. It's not much, Blake said. It represents about 3 months of my salary at TechBridge, but I wanted to contribute to your scholarship program. Maybe it can help another young person who reminds you of yourself. Zara read the letter's opening lines. This doesn't excuse what I did, but maybe it can help someone I would have overlooked. I work with kids now who remind me every day that potential exists everywhere, especially in places I was taught not to look. Thank you for showing me what character looks like in action. She folded the letter carefully and looked at Blake with something that might have been the beginning of respect. Character isn't about perfection, Blake. It's about correction. Keep growing. Blake nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. He had expected rejection, anger, or indifference. He hadn't expected encouragement to continue becoming better than he had been. As Zara walked away to comfort other mourners, Blake stood alone outside Pleasant Hill Baptist Church, watching the community that had shaped a woman whose quiet strength had changed his life forever. He thought about Esther Monroe, who had raised a granddaughter to believe that character mattered more than comfort. He thought about Zara, who had used her power to create opportunities rather than to settle scores. He thought about Destiny Williams, who would grow up in a world where someone like Zara Monroe had already cleared the path for girls who dreamed of changing the world through science. Blake Morrison drove back to Oregon that evening, returning to his small apartment and his work with TechBridge. Every day he taught computer skills to refugees and immigrants who reminded him that dignity wasn't determined by wealth or status or the circumstances of your birth. Every evening he reflected on how privilege without purpose had nearly destroyed him and how accountability without redemption would have finished the job. The viral video of his humiliation continued to circulate as a cautionary tale about prejudice and assumption. Blake had learned to live with the permanent reminder of his worst moment, accepting it as the price of becoming someone worthy of the second chance he was trying to earn. Zara Monroe returned to building Phoenix Quantum Computing and expanding the opportunities available to young people who looked like her grandmother's students. The Morrison incident had become a footnote in her much larger story of using technology to bridge the gaps between potential and opportunity. 1 year after their confrontation at 40,000 feet, Blake received a brief email from Phoenix Quantum's scholarship program. Your contribution has funded a full scholarship for Destiny Williams to attend our summer STEM program. Thank you for investing in the future. Blake smiled for the first time in months, understanding finally that redemption wasn't about forgetting the past or escaping consequences. It was about using the lessons learned from failure to create something better than what had been destroyed. Character, he had learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about who you chose to become after discovering who you really were. Zara Monroe proved that true power isn't about putting people in their place. It's about lifting people to theirs. She transformed one man's prejudice into a foundation for thousands of dreams, showing that dignity defeats discrimination every single time. The next time you witness someone being dismissed, discriminated against, or counted out, remember this story. Your voice, your recording, your intervention might be exactly what justice looks like in that moment. If this story moved, you share it. Not just for views, but for values. Because the world needs fewer people who judge others by their appearance and more people who understand that character is the only currency that truly matters. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in action? Have you ever been judged for how you look rather than who you are? Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a community where dignity and respect aren't privileges. They're promises we keep to each other. Hit that like button if you believe in karma and justice. Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength triumphs over loud prejudice, where character defeats privilege, and where the right person always owns the plane. Ring that notification bell because stories like this need to be shared. They need to be heard. They need to remind us all that in a world full of Blake Morrisons, we need more Zara Monroes, people who use their power to lift others up instead of putting them down. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, true power never needs to announce itself. It just needs to be real.